one aspect. Second thing is like it's a front-loaded concept, so you will have a higher net profit impact in the beginning, and then it will gradually go down because of the discounting. Yeah, the interest charge is usually higher in the beginning. Yeah. Again, I think the same repetition of the same thing which we have just covered. Okay, so this concludes the section 1. Any questions, any comments, any feedback? Okay. Is it a good sign or a bad sign? Okay. Now let us see what is the scope of IFRS 16. I think it's very much in line with IAS 17. However, IAS 17 always lacked few technical aspects. So I think IFRIC 4 was a good example, like which ISP had to issue, that there were certain contracts which were not really about a particular asset. It was always used to be a combination of a service and an asset criteria. So then ISP issued the guidelines in the form of IFRIC 4 that those arrangements should also be considered as leases. Then 627 SIC 27 also was a good example for the sale and lease back transactions. For instance, the transactions which were in the legal form of a lease but economically were not really a lease arrangement. So I think IFRS 16 has now somehow tried to address all these limitations or all these shortcomings which were there in IAS 17. So that's why like now IFRIC 4, IFRIC 1 and SIC 27 are somehow superseded by IFRS 16. Then what is still not in the scope is like the software licenses and intangible assets, the right of use for intangible assets, intellectual properties and all, because more relevant guidance is available under IFRS 15, IAS 38. So somehow ISB has concluded that guidance is more relevant and more applicable for these particular items. Partially out or recognition exemptions are again the short-term leases and leases of low value assets. So people at the back, you can hear me properly, right? Yes? Okay. So what do we mean by short-term lease and low value asset leases? Okay. The first criteria which ISP has laid down in IFRS 16 for a short-term lease is that it has to be up to 12 months. Including all the renewal options which lessee wants to exercise. So it cannot be more than 12 months. Just a second. Yes. And the other important aspect is that no aggregation is required. For example, if a company decides that the laptops are low value, but it may have like 2,000 laptops, so in aggregate those laptops are quite material to the financial statement, but IASB has concluded that no aggregation is required. These will still be considered as low value assets because every laptop can be used individually. It's not dependent on the other laptop. However, in the case of a server, for instance, you have a big server, it has many upgrades, and every upgrade is somehow negotiated separately. Maybe it's a low value, but the server itself is a high value, and these updates have to be used in conjunction with the overall server. So these are considered as part of the server as one asset. Oh, what happened? By the way, like one practical tip, at Deutsche Post level, what we have done, we have defined the asset categories as low value. Instead of assigning any amounts, we said, okay, all the furniture and fixtures are low value. All the water dispensers are low value. All the coffee machines are low value. All the IT equipment apart from server is low value. This is what we have aligned globally with PwC. So it's a materiality aspect as well. And so, sorry, one more tip. If you have to decide between a low value and short-term lease, go for the short-term. Yeah, it's easier to defend. Then the other practical expedient which is applicable or which is available under IFRS 16 is that if you want to lease, for instance, 20 vehicles with the same lease term, with the same lease payment, then instead of treating these as 20 different assets, you can treat this as one virtual asset. Yeah, and treat this as one virtual asset and capitalize this as one right of use asset. Yeah, so IASB has allowed that if the impact of capitalizing these individually is not material, then treating it as one asset, then you can go for portfolio approach. This is also very helpful tip. Yeah, so for instance, in DHL environment, yeah, we usually have fleet renewal contracts where all the courier vehicles are replaced after 3 years or 4 years, and usually this is done with the same company, with the same terms. So you can just imagine, for a big country, if you have to capitalize 200 vehicles with one contract as 200 different assets, instead of just one asset, it can really save some pain, yeah. Okay, just the same decision tree which we have said. Okay, the first thing is like, see if you can go for the short term, go for it. If not, then see if it's a low value, yes, expense it into P&L. Then the second thing is like, see that if it's not a low value, can you apply the portfolio approach? Go for that. If not, then unfortunately you have to take a pain of capitalizing and disclosing individually the right of use asset for every lease contract. Yeah? Okay, just a quick example, which I think most of it I've already covered. So yeah, just IT equipment, as I said, like mostly at DPDHL, we have decided that we will follow the category approach, where certain categories of assets have been classified as low value. So irrespective of the amount, we will simply expense those into the P&L. Yeah, this was somehow globally aligned. And the other thing is like also the low value and the short term is also like considering all the practical aspects as well, like whether you want to renew the lease contract for another extension period or not. So this is also something which we have to consider. Yeah. Yeah, this is the solution of this particular scenario. I think it's the same thing which we just discussed. Nothing new in that one. Short term and then low value assets, like if you have to go by category of the asset, then yeah, you can decide IT equipment is low value, office furniture is low value. Then portfolio approach, if it is beneficial, then do apply the portfolio approach, for example on the company card, because these are negotiated on one contract. Also, yeah. Okay. Some practical tips. See, I don't miss anything. Okay, so first thing is like IASB will never communicate an amount in real terms. Yeah, so they have always said the impact should not be material. It's always in a relative terms. Yeah, so globally somehow the audit firms are somehow revolving around $5,000 for a low value asset category. I'm not sure for Pakistan, maybe it's too much, but globally this is the value, you know, like which somehow Big 4 or Big 5 are somehow, you know, revolving around the $5,000 for individual asset value. Yeah. And then the other thing is like at Deutsche Post level, we said, okay, yeah, we will not go for the specific amount. We will define the asset categories which can be treated as low value. Yeah. So at Deutsche Post DHL level, yeah, where we have to deal with hundreds and thousands of assets, we said, okay, like we will define certain asset categories as low value assets. Land is usually not acceptable to be considered as low value. In Pakistan, maybe it will not be a big problem, but for us it was a bit of pain, yeah, because you have to really lease a small portion of land to put in the post box. It's a really small piece of land, and somehow PwC was not convinced that we can treat really land as a low value asset. Yeah. although the post box itself was a low value asset, but the land was not. Okay, so yeah, in my opinion, ICAP may consider issuing some guidance that how this low value thing should be interpreted by the companies. I think it will be a good tip. Yeah. For us, yeah, it was a really big challenge to convince and to agree with PwC and all this, yeah, because we were, I think in Europe, we were the first company who went for an early adaptation of IFRS 16. Yeah, so it was a heavy debate. Okay, any comments, any suggestions, any feedback? Yes, sir. No.
So you're saying that the low value assets needs to be expensed out in the first year, right?
Yes.
As soon as you enter into the lease,
Yes.
right?
When you purchase, you expense it out.
Yeah, but this is a lease. Still is a lease.
Oh, sorry. Lease, if you lease, then for example, if you pay monthly rental of 500 euros or something, then you treat it as a lease expense every month 500 euros.
Right.
It's a lease,
Right.
but it doesn't have to be on the balance sheet.
Right. Right.
You have to still apply the same guidance which was there under IAS 17.
Yeah. So for low value assets, you can treat it as kind of the operating lease, and if it's a higher value asset, then you treat it as it's kind of finance lease. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks.
Unfortunately, my ear is blocked because of the family. Okay, in my opinion, I think this is the most important part, identification of an asset, yeah, which really defines a lease contract, yeah. What is the difference between a lease contract and a service contract? So you can see, like in the lease contract, the lessee or a customer controls the use of an asset, not the asset, the use of an asset. And in a service contract, lessor or a supplier controls the use of an asset. Okay? It can also happen, yeah, the asset is placed at a customer's place, but still it's not a lease because somehow the use of that asset is controlled by the lessor or by the supplier. It can also happen. Okay, so this is the key distinction between a lease and a service contract. This is something which IASB has said. Yeah, this was from the IASB agenda for IFRS 16. And why they were so keen in making it so clear? Because for the service contracts, IFRS 15 has to be applied. Yeah, so it's a different concept. And service contract does not generate, okay, we will discuss in our coming slide, yeah. Okay, so basically, what is a classic lease contract? So IFRS 16 has laid down 3 requirements for any contract to be classified as a lease contract. First thing is there has to be an identified asset. Okay? So in the coming slides we will discuss more about what do we really mean by an identified asset. Second thing is basically right to use that particular asset. Yeah? And third thing is it has to be for a certain period of time in exchange of a consideration. Consideration can be in kind or it can be in cash. Yeah? So 3 main criteria which are laid down by IASB under IFRS 16 for any contract to be classified as a lease contract. This is a very important aspect, so we have to be really, yeah.
Can you repeat it again?
Sorry?
Can you repeat the criteria again? The 3 steps, can you repeat them again?
Yeah, okay, no problem. The first thing is like there has to be an identified asset. Second thing is like there has to be, it has to be defined that who is going to use, who has the right to use that particular asset. And third thing is basically it has to be for a certain period of time in exchange of a consideration. This consideration can be in kind or can be in cash. Okay, clear? as I said, identification of an asset is, I think, one of the most debatable topics in my opinion. Okay. Yes. So how do we define a lease contract? What are the different relevant decisions which an accountant or a controller has to make to see if this is a lease contract? So this kind of a decision tree. So you can see the first thing is, like, while reading a lease contract, we have to see if there is an identified asset. It can be explicit or it can be implicit. Explicit is like, for example, if a vehicle with a particular number and everything is mentioned there. And implicit is like if there is no real mention of the type of a vehicle or a model of a vehicle, but you know that the other person has only one vehicle, which is leased to you, then it's already implicit. Yeah. Or for example, if you want to lease an aircraft, PIF wants to lease an aircraft, and we know that this company has only one aircraft, then this is already an identified asset. Second thing is, like, does the customer have the right to obtain substantially all the economic benefit from the use of an asset? Okay, so other aspect is, like, for example, if you want to buy a capacity on an aircraft, on a cargo aircraft, for example, you say, okay, every day I want to buy 40% capacity on aircraft, although there is an aircraft number mentioned on the contract, it has a route and everything, but still it will not be classified as a lease contract because you are not substantially getting all the benefit from the use of that particular asset. Yeah, you are not getting the full benefit from the use of that particular asset. You are only getting 40% capacity from that aircraft. So the person who operates that aircraft, or the airline who operates that aircraft, has the flexibility to mix and match the place and to define the right fill for the aircraft. Yeah, so still the aircraft is in the control of the operator. Yeah, and the other aspect is, like, who has the right to direct